don't know why this is,
What's up, Jennifer?
I can't, the screen sharing is not working for me. Can you help by chance, Scott?
I can stall for another minute,
Okay,
and I'll get the deck up there.
thank
Share
you.
some other welcome.
Okay. All right. My screen just went blank, so I'm like staring at nothing right now. I'm trying to problem solve here. I apologize. Um, So welcome everybody. While we're waiting to bring that up, I want to first say hello. I'm Jennifer Patterson from Department of Education, joined here by my colleagues Alex and Scott. And if there's other folks from ODE joining, you're welcome to introduce in the chat. So our goal here today in office hours, if you haven't been with us, is really four things. We want to help provide clarity around RSSL guidance. We want to allow for sharing between all of you as practitioners. We want to reinforce key big ideas, and we want to offer two-way communication. So we hope that this meets that need. We also want to give you an update. This probably isn't a surprise for all of you, but we won't be hosting office hours next Monday, December 21st or the 28th. So our next office hours will be January 4th in year 2021. So we recognize that many of you are attempting to rest and take a break, celebrating solstice or other holidays as might be relevant for you. And here we go. Here's our slideshow. So with that, we had planned on highlighting uh, a topic that we are hearing often from you around, which is grades and graduation. We've conducted a few listening sessions last week around this important topic and have synthesized some themes. So with your permission, thought we would spend a little bit of time talking about grades and graduation, get some more input from you here, see what may be missing from what we've compiled so far, and then create some open space for other themes or questions that you may have. Also, just wanted to highlight for you that we're currently in the process of getting further clarification on the safe harbor clause. We know that's something many of you have questions on. So just wanted to name that as we know more and can share more there, we will. Anything to add, Scott?
No, that sounds good. Hello and welcome everybody. Thanks, Jennifer, for leading us.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go to the next slide. So my goal is just to, I'm going to talk quickly here just to overview sort of a synthesis on grading and graduation, again, that represents a collection of educator voice and input. It certainly is not meant to be every voice, so take that with a grain of salt and recognize that this is an imperfect synthesis because it doesn't reflect community and student voice as well. Next slide. So the first thing we want to name that's sometimes helpful just to kind of zoom out a little bit is that Oregon is not alone. There is a lot of conversation right now, lots in the media around how do we grade during a pandemic. So it's certainly a national issue, a national conversation. We will name that it's framed from a deficit space, not an asset space. We know that our children are achieving in lots of ways. We know that they're surviving along with us through multiple pandemics. But this does help kind of highlight in snapshots that in Oregon, like in other states named here, there is a concern and increasing curiosity around our students passing classes at a high, are more students receiving failing grades this year in 2020, 2021 than they have in previous years, and more interest in who's affected and is that impact, how is that impact disproportionately affecting our communities of color and students of color. So you can see here that we're not alone in Oregon, and this is something that's gaining a lot more traction and more more sort of, I guess, just more press as we continue. Next slide. So this is, we have a couple of slides that attempt to summarize like what's going well related to grading. And so I'm just going to highlight a few of these here. You can read what's on this, what's on the screen, but certainly want to name that across the board, we're hearing that student engagement is stronger than it was in the spring. So that's a win. Lots of positive feedback around limited in-person instruction where it's available, is helping to re-engage students. Uh, Teachers are thinking about grading in flexible ways, and there are some districts that are having some small success with pause weeks that are designed to help catch students up. Next slide. We're also hearing from you that the collaboration and support from ESDs has been really strong. We're hearing that in districts where they're giving teachers an option of giving Fs or assigning incompletes, that most educators are electing to give incompletes. We're also hearing that seniors generally are experiencing the greatest relative success compared to 11th, 10th, and 9th grade students. And we're hearing stories that some students are actually finding more success in comprehensive distance learning than they did in a brick and mortar setting. We're also hearing lots of challenges. So we've listened well and tried to capture them here on the next slides. So definitely we are hearing concerns around engagement, motivation, and mental health, concerns around students needing to prioritize work over school, concerns around how are the students who aren't passing courses, um, the data around that, particularly for our students who are historically marginalized and underserved by the system. We've definitely also heard that without the hook of extracurricular activities and sports or athletics or clubs, or that social fabric that's sort of the glue of the larger school experience, that the kids are struggling to stay engaged. Next slide. Lots of concerns from you we're hearing around 9th grade students, particularly related to Algebra 1 and English 9, that those are significant hurdles. Concerned that, like for one school that we talked to, for example, said that more than half of their 9th grade students have multiple Fs. So definitely some concern around how to set 9th graders up for success. And then definitely there's been consensus so far that the largest concern is around how to support 9th, 10th, and 11th graders, while also naming that there are some seniors that are far away from graduation. Many of you have expressed concerns about how to both be flexible with seniors that already have enough credits to graduate, while also holding on to needs for ADM and holding ADM study for budgetary reasons, but wanting to certainly not put that before student needs, but naming that tension. Also, just a recognition that we don't at the state level collect grades. And so we don't actually have good data to look at together and examine with curiosity, looking for trends across the state to disaggregate, et cetera. So this is an area where we have an absence of information to work from. We're hearing a need for collaboration between higher ed and K-12. Also learning that a lot of teachers actually haven't gotten firsthand opportunities to work through the guidance and really understand what possibilities or opportunities there are within the recommendations. So many aren't aware of the different credit options that are available. And then lastly, hearing that students are struggling in elective classes as well because there isn't that hands-on context or opportunity. So with that, you can stop the sharing, Alex. I know that was fast, but wanted to also create enough space for other conversation. But first, just wanted to kind of open up to conversation in the chat to say, was there anything that really resonated with you in terms of what's going well and or where there's challenges? And is there anything that you'd really like to add that you think we haven't captured there that is reflective of what you're experiencing and what students are experiencing from your perspective?
You're also welcome to unmute and jump in if you want to put it in the chat, or you can say it out loud.
Yeah, hi, Scott. This is Billy Wortman from Adrian. Hey,
Hey, welcome.
just want to say, hey, I know you said there's a lot of things going good, but I just know over here kids are struggling, missing out on their social. I think that's an important thing. Um, yeah, I just would like to know how people are how making it a positive experience at times. We try, we're really trying, but if there's any tips out there, I'd like them. So thank you.
Thanks, Billy.
Just an invitation for anyone to respond to Billy if you're having any small wins or bright spots that you'd like to highlight or share. You're welcome to put them in the chat or reach out to Billy. I will say, Billy, one of the things we've heard in terms of what's going well is um, trying to maximize, personalized outreach. So encouraging staff to get on the phone and find any kind of avenue to connect to kids. And also really leveraging that family connection and any sort of relational trust, like who within our system knows this student or knows this family and who could reach out, even if it's not the biology teacher in the class that the student is failing. Really leveraging and finding ways to build on any sort of context of relationship, even if it's a child's previous teacher or someone who has relational context. We've been hearing that people are finding success with with that, as well as trying to do what they can to benefit students, serving them in limited in person to the extent that that's an option.
We've
Another
also
quick,
started reaching out to our families. We do home visits to all of our families. Of course, our families have the option of us doing that, but our teachers volunteer to go, and we do it socially distanced, of course. But we bring school supplies, we bring food boxes if needed, we bring anything a student would need to be successful when we do those home visits. And we have found huge success with continued engagement with LIPI after we've had these home visits, and students we've actually seen a pretty significant percentage increase when we have reached out and done home visits with our families. So it's definitely worth the time and effort and energy to do that.
last couple of comments in the chat made me think about some of the feedback patterns we're hearing, both from the listening Jennifer's reflecting, and then we've also been doing, tonight's our last one, but we've been doing this, well, not last forever, last in a series of teacher outreach sessions that Colt Gill has led, and probably getting around 600 or 800 teachers in total. We're doing lots of listening, and we're working on a high level summary we'll have in a couple of weeks, and we'll certainly loop that back around here as well. But this kind of like Michelle and I think Sienna, tell me if I'm saying your name wrong, kind of like the two sides of this, which is like, no one's really happy with responding to a pandemic, but there are things where there's like both some kids succeeding and teachers going like, wow, I can do some differentiated things and use technology in ways that are kind of coming to life for some folks. And simultaneously, it's not working either for teachers or families or that exhaustion. And so it's less trying to us give like one simple, like this is the state of things, but we're really trying to track and then think about what that reality means in terms of the next few months as we move forward. So appreciate the kind of shared sense making. Jennifer, anything else that you want to add or ask any additional questions about before we open up to broader Q&A?
No, I think
Shauna, thank you, Shauna. I apologize.
The only last thing I'd say is that there's lots of energy in the chat around how exhausted people are. So just honoring that we've been in this long haul response mode, and I just want to appreciate and extend an invitation for us to be generous with ourselves and one another and students. And this is a time to really kind of cultivate that generosity, and also just to find ways that we can, like, connect to those bright spots, even no matter how small, and use them to spread the honey and pollinate possibility. I know it sounds easier than it is. And in the places where we are hearing stories of success, it's that notion of being that teachers and educators are helping to buoy one another's spirits with telling beautiful stories of where they're finding success and where they're meeting students. So I think that's really important. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely acknowledgement too. We recognize these. I should be clear, Scott, in sharing that these listening sessions were with secondary, educators and leaders, really around grading in the 9-12 context and related to graduation as well. So, absolutely recognize that some of the nuances of what's working well and what's hard is really different depending on potential age of student and or grade level band with which you're working. All right, Scott. So we want to definitely open it up to invitation for other things that are front of mind for you and things that you want to highlight or clarify. Any framing, Scott, further framing to provide around that?
So I don't know about framing, but I think, well, one, just an extra double dip of appreciation and recognition of the exhaustion level. And then two, one other thread to pull on that will then help us think through the conversation we'll have, which is in one of these teacher outreach sessions, someone asked Colt about essentially will there be more changes, to guidance or state approach? And he pretty straightforwardly was like, yes, there will be more changes, only because the nature of responding involves change. And we definitely tried to signal even down to the version numbers that we were going to keep iterating guidance. And sometimes people appreciate that and see the value of that change and trying to track edits and colors and try to show that progress. And other times people appropriately in ways our team appreciates kind of make fun of the constant changing nature of ODE's things. We saw a really good video from Southern Oregon a month or two ago. We do have to keep evolving. The guidance will keep changing as we learn more about the virus, as situations change. And we're obviously all cheering on developments, and also have to be super vigilant, especially right now going into winter. And so as we break out into questions, everything from do you extend limited in person or not, or what we're understanding about changes to quarantining in the CDC. So we'll take on as many questions as you can and just keep them coming in the chat, and we'll collectively try to get as many as we can. But that's a good probably way to think about it, is just, it's exhausting, and we do better if we don't exhaust ourselves. So we have to breathe, stay grounded, keep a sense of humor, and find ways to keep moving. So we'll try to do that as we move through the meeting and answer questions you might have. And we know it's a time where districts in particular are trying to get settled, thinking about what comes in January. So I think that's it, Jennifer, and let's just start to dive into the questions. First one I might pull on, John, in the chat, you asked about LIPI being extended to 4 hours. I think two things about that are important. So one, you have to put limited in person in context. It's designed to be a supplemental thing that is not at its core your primary instructional strategy. I know some folks have been able to do that if they're in smaller schools, to have it be a core feature. It's really intended to kind of bring these additional supports. And extending it has both potential limitations from a health and safety standpoint, but more so that you don't want to extend it and just be school. Otherwise, you might as well just extend school. The only big difference being the size of very distinct cohort controls. So we are thinking about that, but I wouldn't be likely waiting on seeing some expansion of LIPI. I don't think that's likely to be the way. You'd be more likely to see other types of things come into the formulation than that. But we do know it's important, and it's been a really, we hear lots of positive feedback about it. So it's not to diminish the value of it, just about how to grow it may not be through that version. The other thing I wanted to mention, just as a highlight, we are going to be updating the Ready Schools guidance to match the CDC's recent change. We mentioned this last week. Anticipate it will actually come out near the end of this week to match up to the CDC still recommends 14 days of quarantine. My OHA colleagues can probably talk through the details better, but they've created some adjustments in timing and allowed for some options if you get a negative test result and quarantine. And so we'll be adjusting the scenario planning document in Ready Schools to map up to that new guidance. We get asked that a lot, so I'll just headline that is coming. It's on its way. It's not in place yet. A few details to wrinkle out in terms of the scenarios and how that plays through, especially people like immediately jumping to, well, then if you can't get a test and the test not available, can I still only do the 7 days? And the answer, no. So we're gonna like work through the puzzles of how people might interpret it. OHA colleagues, any more that you want to add to that one?
Hi, Scott. No, I mean, I would just, say exactly what you said. It's 7 days if you have a negative test within 48 hours, and then 10 days if you're just doing the quarantine. So yeah, exactly what you said.
Great. All right, what else do we see in the chat?
Got questions around timeline for Safe Harbor and any update for a school who has been, so timeline for making any decisions about extending Safe Harbor, questions I'm getting in the private chat. And then also if from Julie, if we were in person before break, can we go back to school January 4th?
Great. So let's first start with a reminder of what Safe Harbor is, then talk about what happens on January 4th if there's no changes to it, and then talk about timeline for any adjustments. So the Safe Harbor guidance basically outlines for schools, because it's at the school level, who were previously operating under exceptions in the old metrics framework. When the new one was released on October 30th, what got put forward was the idea that you could continue to operate as you were under that prior exception up until January 4th, even if you were in the orange or red in particular is the one that's really material here, the red distance learning operating status, where the new metric framework says, if you're in red, you need to immediately move to distance learning. It basically said, if you're operating under this prior exception, which previously allowed you to do that, even if the metrics are high, you could keep doing that. And it effectively put like a effective date on January 4th, saying like, at that time, you need to be prepared to move. And as of course that gets closer, there's a lot of like pulse checking, like, is that real? How's it really going to work? Are you sure you're going to stick with it? Are you guys going to change it? Disagreement about it being there in the first place. Folks who don't have those prior exceptions being frustrated that other people might have that. There's a lot of different views about that. And if there were no change in Safe Harbor, and I'm not saying there will or won't be, just saying if there were no change, the way we've interpreted it is that come January 4th, some school districts or some schools open January 4th. Metrics come out in the afternoon on Monday the 4th. What we've interpreted is immediately means by the end of the week. So whether you open on the 4th or the 5th or the 6th, when the metrics come out on that 4th, if you're in a county where the metrics are in that far right red distance learning column, you would need to move to distance learning by the end of the week. If you were under a prior exception and you were in orange or yellow or green and they come out on January 4th and that, you could continue under your previously adopted exception. That's what the Safe Harbor would do if there were no changes to it. There has been a lot of discussion about the Safe Harbor clause. For all the things I mentioned before, it is under review with OHA. Colt's communicated that in lots of different arenas with folks. I anticipate a decision in the next day or two that will either say, yes, we're sticking with it and here's what it's going to be, or no, here's an extension of that date, or no, some alteration or different way of thinking about safe harbor. All that's kind of in the mix. It's not settled. And I know everyone's kind of waiting for clarity and wants to know. And the guidance is the guidance as it is until there's any kind of an adjustment. But we know people need a kind of, because they know it's up, we are aware that people need a like, yes, it's still in place. So hopefully I've explained what it is and what it would look like if it were in place, and then also a little sense of timeline of any clarity. But let me know with follow-up questions.
Scott, can I ask a question live?
Sure.
Could you say that all again? It's incredibly complicated, and I think I got it. I just don't want to make sure, I don't want to walk away thinking I got it. But if we're open and we have a previous exception, if nothing changes, we stay open, but we need to be ready in case there's a change to RSSL and we have to go with that change. Is that
not quite
fair?
right?
Okay.
There's a good thing the session's recording. I appreciate you trying to say it out in your own words, because that's one of the ways we practice knowing things too. The only adjustment I would say, Glenn, is if you were previously under an exception in the old framework, if there's no change to this structure, come Monday, if you were in red, prior to January 4th, even if you were in a county where the metrics are high, you did not move. You did not have to move. You could move. You could consult with your LPHA. In some counties, the LPHA told people to move, but you didn't have to move by the framework. Come January 4th, you have to move to CDL if there's no change. So that's the one thing that's precise and important in what you said, that what wasn't in there, which is that if you're in a county where you're in the red, that would be what would become different. If you're in an exception under the old metrics, if you're under an exception in the new metrics, which is like the small, remote, rural school, you can keep using that exception. But we're talking about the prior exceptions. It does get confusing. And if I need to, I will repeat it all again one more time, but hopefully that clears it up.
Glenn, was that helpful?
Well, I mean, I'm tempted to just say, we're in Multnomah County, right? So, I know that there's folks from all around the state on the call, but obviously we're in the city where there's pretty high incident rate, and I think we're still in the red. Is that correct?
Yes.
So Scott, just to take it through then, full straight through. If we're in the red now, we're open under a previous exception. We've been open since September.
Yeah.
We were open over the summer.
What exception were you previously under?
We're doing Lippy, but we also have emergency childcare.
That's how you're operating, but what those aren't exceptions. Lippy is a universal allowance and childcare is allowed. So you wouldn't have any change. Those aren't exceptions.
I see. We're not considered an exception, I think is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I think that helps at least.
Yeah, and hopefully, Glenn and Scott, I see that sort of echo people wondering, how do we anticipate that the safe harbor outcome will affect anyone who's operating in Lippy? And
good clarity. So limited in-person instruction is a state allowance. It is universally applied. It's not an exception where you meet criteria. The only note is that it should be done in consultation. When you're in the red, you should be talking to your local public health authority, but it's not an exception. And it is in the new framework as well as the old. So it's not really what I'm talking about. Here, what I'm talking about is like the old exceptions, which were like remote and rural, or if you were in a small county of a certain size, we gave all these specific characteristics of what you could meet. And people opened under them and were operating under them, but they would not actually be allowed to open under the new framework. Those folks were given this kind of grandfather clause, which we call safe harbor. But if you're limited in person, that's not what we're talking about here. I got one more on this topic to pull in, Jennifer, which is essentially wanting clarification about K3. If you were operating under a K3 exception previously, and essentially you've been allowed, because you were under that prior exception, to keep operating as you went to orange into red, do you get to keep that in going forward into safe harbor. So what I want to say is, if it all goes the way it's currently written, if you were in a county that's in the red on January 4th, you have until the end of the week to come out of that. And you have to get back down to yellow in the metrics framework to reopen that. If you were in orange or yellow, you can continue in that exception, right? It's always a sign to us that policy formulation is not working well when it's this confusing. And we know we try really hard, but it's clear this one's become a puzzle. So keep asking questions if it's not.
I was just going to echo the same thing, Scott. Like, it's the only way we learn together is when we're honest about what doesn't yet make sense. So
one last thing I will say, put a little commercial in. Last week I put slides up and we spent like 20 minutes talking safe harbor in detail. So if you missed last week's office hours and you want more safe harbor, you can go there. And we're going to either reaffirm or adjust in the next couple of days. But if this is still feeling like a big puzzle, we had more resources and brought up screens and shared and talked it last week. So there's good resource to learn more if you want it.
Thank you. I just really appreciate that, Scott. So so if you have nothing else to do, you can watch last week's RSSL recording and learn about safe harbor. That sounds like a great invitation and helpful to remember the resources that we've got in front of us. Scott, want to go to vaccinations next, because that's what I promised folks in the chat, lots of conversation around vaccines. So probably first to name up front, we understand that everybody's reading about vaccines today. It's headline news, and understandably so. But probably important to really remember that this isn't going to be a panacea. There's no quick solution. It's certainly news worth celebrating, and something that we really have to temper our enthusiasm around, in the sense that it's not going to result in any sort of quick, immediate solution for how we operationalize schools and keep our public healthy and safe. So some questions in the chat, Scott, about number one, when do we anticipate that teachers may have the vaccine available? And I don't know that we have an answer to that, but any information or insight you may have, or our colleagues in OHA may have?
On the availability date, I can say what the process is, but OHA maybe you can say more about the advisory committee and prioritization process. So a couple of headline things. And you named, Jennifer, the most important one, which is this is a complicated time where people simultaneously could feel excited about the vaccine, and it's probably a long ways off from reaching everybody's doorstep. And so we need to be super vigilant at the same time at the winter. But the state, I believe the governor has stated 100, OHA College, you should confirm 100,000 doses or 100,000 people. For everyone to track, at least the Pfizer vaccine, I believe Moderna, both require 2 shots. The Pfizer one, 2 shots, 3 weeks apart, and 28 days from first shot to end to actually be fully immune. So there's this kind of staging timeline. And when you report it in the news, sometimes they're talking people and sometimes they're talking doses, and it can get a little talk about confusing fast. The good news is you're only dealing with math of either doubling or cutting in half, but it's a good way to track. But the federal government outlined recommendations that it then gave to states, and states have that guidepost, but essentially we're asked to kind of come up with our own prioritization plan. And then Oregon has a standing advisory body that helps us do this kind of thinking about other types of immunizations. And I believe they're meeting and helping kind of do this. We have an initial plan, but I'm not sure that the final details around timing for teachers in particular are worked out. But Kristen and Lee from OHA, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure the details. I think that might be more of a dean question. I do know our healthcare workers are getting them first. I think our long-term care facility residents would be the next group that would get them. I'm not exactly sure the time frame or how long. So But we can definitely touch base with Dean on that.
Yeah. Lee, you're on mute, but I think maybe if you have something to add.
I have to double unmute to be heard. That was, yeah, so you know, Kristen and I are actually pretty like removed from what's been going on with vaccine because we're so busy responding to COVID. But the New York Times 2 weeks ago had a really interesting tool where you could kind of put in information about yourself. And I think teachers would probably fall in about the same place as public health workers, as other essential workers. And across the country, there were 126 million people that would qualify for vaccine before me, because they're prioritizing healthcare workers and those most at risk of severe illness. So it's coming, but it's going to still be a little while.
And just to mark that, the assertive aspirational goal I've heard from both the Trump administration and the incoming Biden administration is 100 million by the end of March. So if you track that, 126 million, you know, give you like some, so you're looking like late spring probably. So that's our sleuthing, but none of us know for sure. So that's like where it's where it lives for now.
Scott, it may also be helpful to, I apologize, may also be helpful to name, there currently isn't any thing that we know of that really, so sorry, oh my gosh, I just completely lost my train of thought. Oh, vaccines. One question is, will teachers be required to be vaccinated? So important to know that at this point in time, that's certainly not anything that is on the horizon or has been part of a larger conversation that teachers would be required to be vaccinated. So that's an important piece of information, I think, to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I'd go one notch stronger. Like I think I heard Colt say essentially the chances of that are very low, but a very high appeal for folks to take very seriously the ability to take the vaccine safely. The only wrinkle would be if an incoming federal administration made some move on that front, which I've heard get a little bit of traction, but also get some hedging. So, but as far as we know, that's not a thing. It's certainly not a conversation that's being had. So that I'm aware of.
Thanks, Scott. I think it's also important to know there's some conversation in the chat saying, Scott and Jennifer, let's be real. Are we going to be in comprehensive distance learning all year with kids? And what can you tell us about that? So I just want to acknowledge, Shauna, appreciation for your question. Certainly not alone in asking that question. And want to also say that the governor has definitely named a desire and a goal to have students in school in person in February. And Biden administration has also named some strong aspirational goal around ensuring students are in school as well. Now that said, there's a lot of space between where we are now and that aspirational vision. And Scott, I don't know if you can fill in any more than I have there, but just want to at least, honor the question and name that I don't think we have a crystal ball or know the answer.
The only thing I would add is like, if you want to think along, I mean, we don't know. We appropriately, as I hope you all would think would be happening, are constantly in review, both ourselves, OHA, and the governor's office around the choices we're making, how they're working, who benefits, who doesn't benefit, what the impacts are, what's changing with the virus, how everything's kind of playing out through community, what protocols seem to be working or not, and then the feasibility of different actions. There's such a puzzle of variables. You've got transportation and how to safely transport kids. It becomes a real limiting factor. You've got different levels of compliance with guidance and different abilities to see people wear masks and face coverings and attend to things. You've got, obviously, I think relatively, although not perfectly, universal agreement that everyone wants to be in person if safely possible. And then you've got, the ways in which they need to honor and attend to all the people whose lives and well-beings would be in the mix and puzzle. of coming back into school. When's the right time? When's the right weather? Vaccines. There's so many variables. I think we can't tell you one way or the other in the let's be real. I think back to the framing at the beginning, I think the let's be real answer is you very well could in some counties be in CDL to the end of the year. And for some districts who've chosen to be like, we're going to just put all our eggs in one basket and try to be great at CDL. That might even be what is, a way to go. Whether that will be local decision making or the state will intervene, these are all variables. And the other hand is you should be prepared for the possibility that there will be hopefully time and information, but a moment of like, let's go back to school and get back in person. There's legislative concepts heading into the long session that call for school to either go extended through the summer or to break early and then come back midsummer, the whole state. If the legislature were to come to session and do that, then our world would change again. So there's so many variables. And I saw one person applaud and one person shake their head no. So we are all doing the best we can with lots of different instincts at the same time. So I just like be prepared for some change and it going either way. And that's about as real as we can say right now. And I know we're the same. Everyone wants, part of the exhaustion is not knowing and things constantly changing. And we all want some certainty. And that's just not what the moment kind of asks of us. So that's kind of the most realistic I can offer it.
Scott, I also just want to offer a couple things. Just really, Billy, appreciate your vulnerability and kind of naming and unmuting at that beginning, just that raw feeling of, we're not feeling a lot of success. And so if somebody's having success, could you help us see what we can't see or feel, touch into something that feels elusive. And also just an offer, it's interesting. Sometimes it's really hard when you're in the muck to know and to name what's going well. And sometimes just having a peer or a thought partner come alongside and listen and observe helps to clarify. So just a suggestion to Billy to reach out to us at ODE, reach out to colleagues at your ESD, reach out to other people on this call or colleagues that you trust in your region or the state to say, hey, could you come sit alongside us for a little bit? Could you listen in? Could you take a peek? And just help us identify is what's going well, because we're not able to touch into it right now. And that practice of looking for what's right and scanning the environment for what's working cannot be understated in this kind of a moment where there's such a focus on what's hard and what's not working well. So just a little encouragement there, and happy, Billy, to follow up with you or anyone as well. Want to also just make sure that people aren't getting too concerned about summer, and so just a real reminder that when Scott and I are in this conversation with you, that we're bringing all sort of variables and context to the surface. And so just a real strong reminder that just by offering that what if thinking of like this could happen certainly is not suggesting that it will happen or that it's close to happening. So just a appeal for your balanced space and listening to what we're offering and really kind of holding it loosely until there's unless we signal like definitively this is happening. And absolute appreciation, Steve, you talked about construction, certainly recognize that summer is in many places already like planned what's happening there. So shifting or changing is no small thing.
One other thing, Jennifer, I'd like thank you for that. And it's a part of what we're trying to create with this space is the ability to be a little bit more conversational and a little less like presentational. And then that runs the challenge of like we understand our roles and we're trying to be careful with our words. But sometimes it's like trying to share something, but I know that there's like a need you have to like read tea leaves. We do the same thing in our jobs. But hopefully in this case, you can hear the spirit of the sharing the way we're intending it. I did want to flag one other thing that I think is really important that we're getting to work on this week with OHA and some ESD reopening liaison advisors and some staff at ODE. So we've become aware of something that many of you may be aware of, but is this dynamic around how contact tracing is happening through local public health. And that where there are cases, there's times where local public health, out of kind of being at this kind of surge capacity, is struggling to be able to do contact tracing. There are a couple of things to elevate in that conversation for now. One is that don't get caught off guard if your local public health authority tells you that they don't have the capacity to contact trace, and instead need to ask your whole cohort who may be impacted to quarantine. That could happen simply out of triaging resources to care for people. That's not been widely communicated yet, which is what we're working on, is to do a little bit more broadcast email to update people, but just to give you a little bit of like update on work in progress. The other thing we're going to be doing is then saying, okay, when that's true, what are the other ways we might respond that are tied to training and good tools, and it not just being a kind of free for all or too confusing. So we're going to kind of try to scramble some things to try to better create tools. It might take us a couple weeks or be something that kind of comes in the new year. We'll see where we get to, but I just want to put on the radar, we are very much aware of this kind of tension. We want to support our local public health, and we know that they're equally kind of stressed and stretched. But we know there's a little bit of like, we trained everyone to think about contact tracing one way. We're hitting some pinch points now that we're under some pressure. We're aware of that and working on it. So just want to kind of flag that for everybody.
Beautiful. Thanks, Scott. Just appreciation for anything you add to the chat. You know, Scott, Alex, and Dan and I, we take this, we hold it, your words matter. So even if they're not voiced out loud, just an encouragement to share your thinking in the chat. It really matters to us, and we learn from you, and you inform our thinking. Just want to acknowledge, Denise said something that I think is really important to give voice to, Scott, early in the chat from Santiam. First of all, just hoping that you're doing okay in Santiam Canyon, recognition of what you're journeying through. I had a chance to exchange some texts with Todd Miller, the superintendent there, and just continue to deepen compassion for what it means to show up and lead in our areas of the state that are also healing from wildfires. But Denise says several district nurses have shared with each other that we're dealing with significant increase in COVID cases and exposures in the last 2 weeks. So I think that's important to name, and appreciation for the healthcare workers or folks connected to the healthcare system on this call as well. And I just wanted to pause, Scott, and appreciate what that means for anyone who is caring for the health and well-being of our children, which is all of us, but particularly school nurses have a really important role in the ecosystem of care at play. And we understand that how tapped everyone is as well. Even pre-COVID, you know, as a school principal, I was like, you know, dealing with head lice and cleaning up throw up and all sorts of things because we were always short-staffed with school nurses. So just an incredible recognition of what that must feel like in this present space and time.
Shared appreciation for the school nurses and for all the schools
Oh.
that don't have them, because there's a bunch that don't, and then that requires extra stretching. So all on those fronts. I do want to make sure to offer Kristen and Lee, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want to make space if you had anything from OHA that you wanted to offer or notice from the chat, or anything you think people should be aware of, and no pressure if not.
I don't have anything. I don't know if Lee does.
I don't either. Maybe we should prepare for you to call on us every week, Scott. We still aren't.
You know, that's how we roll around here. And
I
then,
appreciate you giving us the space.
we try. And then I am not seeing if KT is on from OSAA, but if so, also useful to do a quick check there, if anything on the athletics.
I am on, Scott. I saw the question about the cohort connection.
Yeah.
Our understanding is that there's no connection between the school day cohorts in the afternoon I can't say that I've specifically heard about staff, but in general, we've heard there's no connection between the cohorts in the school day cohorts versus the afternoon after school activities.
Well stated, KT. We have the same understanding. So when we get this a lot in the COVID inbox team around what, and it makes sense actually in a way. It's like it's good thinking. Like everyone's actually trying to think about the kids and about the number of cohorts, and we're training this idea about mitigating risk and not creating spread. And then functionally, what's true is that the cohorts during the school day don't limit what happens in the after school or extracurricular space from a guidance, like structural kind of perspective. So
Scott, I think, are other people having a hard time hearing Scott?
Yes.
Okay. It's always that awkward moment. And Scott, you just got really robotic for a second there and slowed way down, which might be intentional. You might just trying to be, draw us into presence. Maybe not.
It wasn't. Can you hear me now?
It's a little wonky. Sorry, friend.
But Scott, that was our understanding as well. But that best practices of trying to connect those cohorts, especially for our smaller populations of schools, we know that we have schools trying to do that to lessen the exposures for kids. So there's kind of that, double-edged side of it, but people are trying to have those smaller cohorts and have those kind of stay intact after school as best they can if they're able to because of smaller populations. So yes, definitely on the same page as you guys.
Gonna try that. Can you hear me, Jennifer?
Yes, beautiful. Thank you.
I'm enjoying the slow motion responding idea. Unless it's terrible on your ears. Totally, KT, we're in alignment. I put it in the chat. No adjustments there.
Scott, Andrea, and Andrea, I don't mean to put you on the spot. Andrea asked a question. I want to make sure she gets an answer to it. And I put it in private chat. And I'm going to read it out loud. It says, for the 2-week look back and thinking ahead to January 4th, what is the report that would be valid on January 4th for decision making? Knowing that if a county is in CDL in the January 4th afternoon report, then they will need to transition. But thinking about districts that really want to be open on January 4th, I think it would be the December 21 report, yes?
No, that's not the way we've interpreted it, although it would be, Andrea, you could see if you're thinking about like what should inform district decision making, that looking at like a prior moments report and trend lines could really help factor. And you also got to think about impacts to your families to move around. But what we've said to folks, kind of like final formal thing, is that the report that comes out on the afternoon of Monday the 4th. Now, some folks will have chosen to open back on the 4th. And then might have to adjust based on the report that comes out. That's their choice. We've kind of encouraged, not required, people to think about having that open day be the 5th or the 6th, so you can actually see what comes out. But formally, that report, which will then look back at the 2 prior weeks, would be the one that if safe harbor is being applied, and if you're in the red, that you would have to respond to, will be the report that comes out on Monday afternoon the 4th.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Of course.
So, I think some counties are really hopeful that their numbers will come down into the transition column prior to January 4th.
Yep.
So yes, I definitely hear that you're encouraging districts to look at the 5th or the 6th for an opening date to wait for that report. But there's a lot of districts that want to be open on the 4th, and a lot of teachers with a lot of questions about that and whether that's okay or not. And so this would apply less to the safe harbor districts and sort of more to the other districts.
Yeah, let me be clear though, that if you're in a district that like wants to open, you still have to respond to what comes out on the 4th by the end of the week. So I think you might be wondering if people are going like, does this 2-week window, like less the 2-week look back and more like, well, I'm not really sure. But what is essential to communicate is that if you choose to open your doors on the 4th and then the report comes out and you're still in the red, or if you wait till the 5th and the 6th, you still have to respond. We're interpreting immediately as by the end of the week. So what comes down that afternoon, folks have to respond to, unless there's an adjustment in the guidance.
Okay.
And thank you, Andrea. All right, Jennifer, you either have time for one more or you to give us a good wrap.
No, I think Mark, I want to end on a high note with what Mark brings forward. I don't think any other state is having this level of open and honest and ongoing communication. Gotta love Oregon. Thanks, everyone. And I'm not sure if I don't know actually if that's true, but I just do want to appreciate, Scott and I don't even remember the seed of this idea. What's true is that you actually you create the energy that makes this possible. So just appreciation for both your beautiful inquiry and the space that you create around generosity and understanding as well. And it's very complex, it's difficult. So it's really is two-way, and we appreciate the opportunity to learn with you and sit alongside you for an hour a week too. So thanks so much. It just, it's a nice sentiment and a good reminder. And you might miss us for 2 weeks. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if Scott grows hair over the new year. We'll see, what is different in 2021, January 4th. Don't miss it. It'll be great. So we'll see you in 2 weeks. Reach out if there's anything in between that we can do to help buoy your efforts. We cheer for you. We believe in you, and we know that this has been quite a year. 2020 has tested all of us in pretty extraordinary ways. So just ending on a high note of gratitude and deep belief for the shared effort. And Billy, I know you're on a phone call, but just know that if we care about your success, and it's a really, I think anybody would reach out and pick up a phone for anybody who's having that sort of a day or month or moment where things feel really hard. So count on each other and rely on each other, and stay connected. Yeah, and also just big appreciation. I also want to echo appreciation for OHA. Thanks for being with us in the journey. All right, Scott 9.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jennifer.
All right,
Bye,
take care,
everyone.
everybody.